you tell this is the first time I've ever done this? Okay. Hi, my name is Olivia. This is Oakey Dokey Knits. This is going to be my knitting podcast, my first episode here. Definitely not my first attempt. I'm not going to tell you how many times I've already tried recording this. It's been a lot, but I think I'm getting more comfortable with the camera the more I try and do it. So hopefully this one will be a winner. I've been knitting for a year and a half, and I've watched so much knitting YouTube. Early on in my knitting, learning to knit journey, I discovered knitting YouTube and podcasts that people would create, and I loved watching them. I found them so inspiring, and I learned so much from them watching people start a project and talk about yarn choice or fiber choice and gauge and different techniques and types of construction, and I just loved learning from them. And also watching, because I'd watch hours and hours of knitting YouTube, and I loved seeing people grow over time in their knitting practice, and I felt like I was growing too and learning a lot, but I didn't really have a record of that. I've been bad at keeping a journal. I've done better at keeping a journal now. My sister is so sweet, and she got me this super cute journal for Christmas, and I've been doing a pretty good job. Actually, I would say a really good job of keeping track of my knitting projects in there. I just loved the idea of a video journal, keeping track of your projects and progress and interests and inspiration over time. I just really loved that idea, and I also loved how whenever I would look in the comments, I'd see so much engagement in terms of people making suggestions or asking questions. Being a pretty new knitter myself, I would love, because I don't have any real life knitting friends. I have tried to teach a few people in my life how to knit, and so far it's been okay, but they're not jumping into it the way I did. And so I don't really have anyone to talk about knitting with, and I love feedback. Everything I learn is basically from YouTube and trial and error, so I would love any feedback that I could get. So yeah, I just decided to make my own channel and see if other people engage and give feedback and suggestions. I would love that. I would be over the moon. But even so, I just like the idea of having a knitting progress video journal to look back on over time and just see how it goes and what I've learned. Yeah, I've been meaning to do this for a long time. I just feel like there's always something getting in the way of me finally sitting down and recording this. At first I had no idea how to even approach recording a YouTube video. I decided just to use my phone. That's what I'm doing. But yeah, I had no idea where even to start, and then I would get sick, and I've been sick a couple times over the last couple months, and I broke out in extreme hives, allergic reaction. I've never had an allergic reaction before, but then I was all red and blotchy for 2 weeks. It seemed like every time I finally was ready to sit down, make an attempt at recording, something would get in the way. I've been determined, okay, today I'm finally going to do it, and it's been light out so much longer in the days now that it's spring, or spring is beginning, but today, and it was sunnier this morning. It's early afternoon right now, but it looks like it's evening. It's so dark out right now, super cloudy. Not complaining, I love cloudy, rainy weather. That's why I do so well here in Vancouver. But it's so dim and dark, and I feel oh man, that could have been one of the things that would get in the way, but I'm not letting it this time. I'm not gonna let it. I'm gonna do this anyway. If it looks dim and dark in here, it's cozy. We're cozy. I wish I had a blanket, and I'd just be oh, I hope you have a blanket and pillows and a hot drink and a project, and you're sitting watching this. So, being my first podcast, I don't know what kind of format I'm going to settle into. The super common format that you always see is finished objects since the last podcast, works in progress or WIPs, and then acquisitions, like things, yarn or supplies or tools or things that you've collected. I think that's the format I'm going to use. We'll see. Maybe things will change. I might do different types of videos. Maybe what I should do is kind of sum up a bit about who I am at this point. Yeah, there. I have a script. Before I tried doing this without a script, and I am such a rambler. I'm so terrible at telling stories. I'll just like jump around all different details and give information that's entirely irrelevant and just talk and go on tangents. So yeah, I have a script that I've written for myself to like stay focused. As I mentioned, my name's Olivia. I live just outside Vancouver. It's basically Vancouver is like the city, but then all the cities around it, or they might as well be one city, might as well be Vancouver too. So currently live just outside Vancouver. I live with my family. We are currently renting a house where they live upstairs, and then I rent the basement suite, which works out perfectly for me. But we are going to be moving pretty soon further out from Vancouver into the valley, into the Fraser Valley. I'm excited about that. We've been looking forward to that for a long time. In terms of where I'm from, I was born near here, kind of out in the Fraser Valley, but I grew up kind of half here, half in southern Ontario, in Windsor to be specific, so it's kind of half and half. I do kind of feel like Windsor's my hometown because I lived in like one place the whole time. My best friend was just a few blocks down, but here I've always, even when I was little growing up here, we moved around a lot, and so I don't feel out here like I have any one specific hometown. Just the lower mainland of BC is kind of my other hometown, and then Windsor, Ontario. After I graduated high school, we moved back here. So I think like, I'm not about to do the math for how long it's been since I graduated high school because I don't want to feel that old. We've now lived out here again back in BC from Ontario for several years, so I'm pretty comfortable here. I've got my life set here, and I'm very close with my family. That's why this arrangement worked so well. For me anyway. I love having my own independent space, and so that's what we're going to try and make work in the new living situation as well, where I kind of have my own space and can be removed and function as my own adult person living my own life. But then I also have all my family like really accessible, just right upstairs. I love that because I often get lonesome if I spend too much time downstairs by myself. And I'm just so close with my family. They're like my best friends. I go up and hang out with them all the time. I definitely identify with Bilbo Baggins. By the way, I love fantasy. I love all things fantasy, especially Lord of the Rings. But I identify with Bilbo because he's got that Baggins side that loves the comforts of home. Okay, Bilbo might be not so fond of his own family, the Sackville Bagginses, to name a couple. But like, I love my family. I love the comforts of home. I love like homemaking, I guess you could say. Like, I love all cozy, homey things. Also how Bilbo has his like Tookish side where he just like craves excitement and adventure and travel. He wants to travel and he wants to come home with stories to tell. So I feel like because of those two sides of me, they're hard to balance, but I have come to a pretty good arrangement, at least for now. Right now I work on the Rocky Mountaineer, which if you haven't heard of it, it's like this luxury tourist experience where you ride a train between beautiful coastal Vancouver through all of, or so many of, BC's varying landscapes, through agricultural valleys, through rocky canyons, through mossy green thick rainforests, and following snaking rivers, and through our semi-arid desert region. A lot of people don't know that there's such thing as desert in Canada. And then on to the Canadian Rockies and just over into Alberta. It's so beautiful. It's such an incredible job that I have. I'm so lucky that I get to work there. Doing that job it's only for half the year, just for the warm months of the year, from spring coming up to autumn in October. It works out so great for me because for those 6 months I get my, or 6-ish months, I get my fix of adventure and excitement and sightseeing and all of the beautiful landscapes and experiences in BC through the summer. But then for the other half of the year, through the cold months, I get to just enjoy home life, reading and making my space all cozy and baking and spending time with my family and my boyfriend, and yeah, of course, knitting a lot. So that being said, I guess I can now move on to kind of describing my knitting journey so far. Sorry if you hear my squeaky chair that I'm sitting on. Before I started knitting, I learned to crochet. So I picked that up, as a lot of people did, during COVID. I didn't know anything about fiber choice or gauge, or when I began, I didn't know anything about reading patterns. Learning to read patterns was so daunting to me. Almost nothing I made in that time was successful. I made a few tote bags that were pretty successful, but I didn't know how to like weave in the ends properly, and so some of them actually like started falling apart. So nothing I made was really successful, but I still enjoyed it. I knew I wanted to knit because I wanted to make sweaters and garments, but I didn't like the look or the feel of crocheted sweaters or garments because they're so thick. Like, crochet is basically just making fabric out of knots, so it's thicker and bulkier. At least my attempts at making garments or sweaters felt that way. So 3 or 4 years after learning to crochet, during my first off season from the train, I was going on a trip back to Ontario to visit, and I brought a pair of straight knitting needles that my great grandma gave me and some of my acrylic crochet yarn, 2 random colors that I had, a gray and a red, or like a burgundy. I picked up knitting in that time. I decided, you know what, I'm gonna try knitting back and forth. I learned a knit stitch, and then I knit back and forth, learned that that's what garter stitch is. And then I undid that block, and then I was like, okay, what about if I knit one way and purl the other way? Because then I learned how to purl, and I learned that the purl is the reverse of the knit. So then I learned, oh, this stitch where it's flat on one side is called stockinette. And then I just was making all these blocks with these straight needles. And then I decided, well, in shows and on cartoons and stuff, when there's that knitting granny, she's like, knit 1, purl 2, knit 1, purl 2. And I was like, what does that make? And turns out it makes rib. So I started ribbing, and I decided, you know what, I'll make a scarf. So yeah, the first thing I ever actually made was this scarf. I just spent the whole trip like knitting on this scarf. I got addicted to it. That was kind of how it all began, and I still have it. I never finished it because I just left. Actually, look, I did weave in a few ends, but I got bored of it, and I knew I was probably never going to wear this scarf. It's not that bad. It's just not my fave. It's not my style. But yeah, so I've got all these ends I never wove in, and that was kind of how I learned to knit. I'm pretty glad that I still have that scarf as like the first thing I ever knit. I still have it, and I've gotten rid of other things that I knit early on that I'll probably mention throughout this podcast episode. But yeah, I don't think I'll ever get rid of that one, probably because it's the first thing I ever knit, and I love that. So after that, as I mentioned, I was like addicted to knitting. I just found it so satisfying and soothing. After that, kept making scarves through the winter, made like a whole bunch of scarves for different people as Christmas presents, and I learned like different types of stitches, and eventually I decided scarves are boring, and I got bored of scarves, and I decided I was going to try and make a sweater. So first pattern I used, well, it's based on the So What Shruggie by Vexnot Studio. I bought that pattern on Etsy because I'd been seeing, I didn't know about Ravelry yet, and on Pinterest I kept seeing this like rolled collar, rolled cuffs, rolled hem look, and I just really liked that. I purchased this pattern, and I made it, but the Shruggie is just like, it's short, it's basically just sleeves and it goes to here, but then I just kept going and I made it into a sweater. For this pattern, I bought my first set of circular needles at Michael's. At this point, I didn't know anything outside of buying yarn and supplies at Michael's. Yeah, I used Lion Brand Heartland in like a darker green. I don't know the like color names. I didn't know anything about fiber choices. Of course, there's nothing wrong with knitting in acrylic. It's just I've found knitting in acrylic, even though I'm like really sensitive to fibers, like that's why I think part of why I stuck with acrylic for so long, because I could not stand anything itchy at all, especially like around my neck or on my chest. Like I couldn't stand it. So I just stuck with acrylic. I was stubborn. I did not want to accept that it was not holding up. So I kept using it. Anyway, so this is a yarn I really liked. I basically just picked out yarn by the color at this point. Didn't know anything about gauge either. I couldn't understand why people were spending so much. Like I was watching knitting YouTube by this point, I think, and why people were spending so much on natural fibers and like hand-dyed yarns and stuff. I couldn't understand. I was like, acrylic is right here. And if you guys want to be like nice to the planet or whatever, that's great. But $30 or $40 for like a skein of hand-dyed yarn, I cannot afford. Or that was me at the time. Once I finished that sweater, I was really proud of it at the time. I couldn't believe that, like, wow, I made a sweater, like, and I'm wearing it. And I like the fabric. I like the color. I even liked the fit, even though I didn't change anything. Like, I didn't do any decreases or shaping or anything. I just made it, lengthened the body tube or the bodice tube or whatever. And it turned out pretty great. Like, considering it was my first sweater knit, there were spots where it was not neat and tidy. That's for certain. But overall, I was really proud of it at the time. But then, due to the fiber choice, it did not hold up very well. Like, with the acrylic, I'll show you on another one that I have. Watching this, you might know that, like, the fibers, the way that acrylic wears, it's like, it gets stringy. It doesn't pill up like natural fibers, like wool. It comes off in wisps, and or it doesn't come off because you couldn't even detach it. It just kind of wisps out, and I did not like the look of that. I still don't. And with all of the kind of mistakes I'd made and problems with the knit, I decided to just give that away. I gifted it, or I handed it down to one of my cousins, my younger cousins. So she loves it. It looks great on her because she has red hair with the dark green. It's so pretty. I learned enough that I decided eventually, you know what, this is in my past. I'm not proud of this anymore. But like retrospectively, I'm still proud of myself given what I knew and stuff at the time and my skill level at the time. I think I did a pretty good job of it. It's just my skill level, I've advanced beyond that. At some point, as I've mentioned, I discovered knitting YouTube, and I don't remember when. I just know that I spent lots of time watching knitting podcasts in those months. I learned so much about making garments and about reading patterns. I figured it can't be that daunting. So after that, I decided to make a cardigan, and I had heard of petite knit by this time. I feel like you can't watch a knitting podcast without hearing about petite knit. So I decided on the Novice Cardigan. So that's the first garment that I can show. This is my Novice Cardigan that I still have. So it's my second garment knit. Look at this little, that was just like an imperfection in the yarn. But I kept it in there because I was like, you know what, I like the look of handmade. I still do. But yeah, I don't know if you can tell, but the way that the yarn, well, I don't think you can tell. It probably looks pretty good on camera. But yeah, the way the yarn just kind of like wisps off. Let's see if I can find a good spot. These little wisps. Oh yeah, see? That's a pretty good example. I don't love that. But anyway, again, I didn't get what all the fuss was about gauge and swatching, and I was like, it'll be fine. Luckily this time it was. I have other ones where it was not. But yeah, this one turned out fine in terms of gauge. I used the same yarn. It's the Heartland, line brand Heartland yarn, but this is like I don't know if it shows this way on camera, but it's like a purpley burgundy kind of color. I still really like this color. love this color. I want to knit more in this color, but not in this yarn. It has not held up well, but I still wear it sometimes, and I never added buttons to it, but it's something else that I am not the biggest fan of is there's no shaping or like back shaping. So it is shorter at the back, but then it falls forward in the front because it's so heavy. So it's like longer in the front than in the back by a lot, and I don't love that look, but yeah, it's still like a cozy sweater thrown with jeans. Now holding it, I'm like, actually I should wear this more. After that, I decided to try knitting a sweater vest. Again, I used the Lion brand Heartland yarn. I used a pattern called Vest Number 1 by Daisy and Peace that I also bought on Etsy. Yeah, again, didn't care about gauge, didn't care about fiber choice. Gauge turned out fine, again, but with the same yarn, but in black, so it's kind of a flecked black. But I did not like how it turned out. Just, I couldn't tell from the photos in the pattern, but I didn't like the fit of it. It turned out fine as a garment other than the yarn choice, but the way that it's designed is that the shoulders like come out. So I think it's meant to be like really oversized. I didn't make it super oversized. Maybe it says that in the pattern. I don't know. I haven't read it again since I made it. But it, for me, what it did is it would kind of like come out on the shoulders like I was wearing shoulder pads. And I did not like the look of that at all. I also had like really short hair, like a pixie cut at the time. And I was trying to grow it out kind of, and I just felt like, I don't know, I felt very masculine wearing a shirt that accentuated my shoulders and with my short hair. So yeah, I never wore it. Or actually, no, that's not true. I wore it like once or twice, but decided, you know what, I don't feel good in this. I don't like the fit of it. So I think I got rid of it. I don't know what happened with that vest. So yeah, I don't know if that was, I mean, fiber choice is totally my fault. Maybe just my pattern choice or the way I did it. I don't know if it's supposed to be that way or not, that kind of shoulder shape, but yeah, I kind of did away with that one. I tried a few other patterns. Most of them I purchased on Etsy. All of the ones I used following that, like basically for the rest of that off season, so for the next few months after that, I didn't finish, or I started and then frogged, and like none of them were turning out because I really only had flat needles or straight needles, and I don't know why. Actually, that's not true. I had a couple pairs of circular needles, but maybe not in the right size. Anyway, I was trying to, for some reason, all the sweaters I wanted to make were like all separate flat knitted panels that you would then seam together, and that I hated I hated that. And one of the patterns I used also had, it was like a beginner pattern, or it was labeled as a beginner pattern, but it had like intarsia hearts. You might have seen this like on Pinterest or something, or on Ravelry. I don't know if it's a pattern on Ravelry, but it had like intarsia hearts around the sleeve, like little ones, and I could not get that right. I am pretty good at watching like YouTube tutorials and learning how to do different techniques just from that. That's how I've learned everything that I know about knitting so far, but I could not figure that out. And maybe it was my gauge, or like I did not gauge swatch. I don't know if I was even trying to meet the recommended gauge or using recommended yarn, but I could not get it to work. And I was like, intarsia? I don't think intarsia is a beginner technique. I still have not figured out intarsia. It's on my list of techniques to learn, but yeah, I've still not tried again to learn intarsia, so I still don't know how. But my yarn buying techniques at this point were just based on color or like feel, not based on, I mean, feel is still important and color is still important to me. If I didn't have the right needles for it, I'd either buy them or make ones that I already had work. And what I was doing was I would buy yarn that I liked and then try and find a pattern or figure out how to make something with it, which I've found is not the way for me. So now what I do is I will find a pattern that I like or want to make and then buy the yarn for it. At this point, I was starting to understand why fiber choice and why natural fibers are good to work with for knit items, knit garments, and why spending the money on them might be worthwhile. But at the time, I was broke. Like, this is now like 6 months of me, this is like to the end of my first off season and 6 months of me not having worked, and I was not good at saving at that point, and I was broke, so I was not going out and buying new yarn. I was just trying to make what yarn I had work. And it was around this time, like at the end of my first off season, that I started getting ads for Arcane Fibre Works, which if you aren't familiar, I know it's pretty popular, but if you're not familiar, is a Canadian hand-dyed yarn company that makes beautiful yarn, beautiful colorways. When I saw those ads, I just thought, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. I have to knit it. I have to try this. But I could not afford it at the time. The one specifically that I became obsessed with was the Back to My Roots colorway that I know they still have. Also the Rambling River Rock colorway, but specifically Back to My Roots. I was obsessed with it because it's so like the Western Red Cedar. I just loved all of the ones that were like Pacific Northwest or Western Canadian or just Canadian in general, nature inspired colorways. So I loved this colorway because the Western Red Cedar is so essential to where I live, like to the Pacific Northwest. It's so beautiful. And this colorway really reflects it. I just can't talk about it enough. It's like the deep greens of not the needles, because cedar isn't really needles necessarily, but like the needles of the cedar, and the deep green, and then the brighter green of the moss with the dark brown of the bark with the like orangey color of the inner wood. So beautiful. So I was obsessed with these colorways. It was so exciting to me, and I knew I wanted to learn how to make socks with this yarn. And I couldn't afford it at the time, but I knew like once I start working again, first thing I'm going to buy is this yarn, some sock needles, and I'm going to learn how to make socks. And that's what I did. I ordered the yarn once I got paid for the first time in a long time. Starting back on the train for my second season, I ordered those two colorways that I mentioned from Arcane Fibre Works and some like 9-inch circular needles, which I don't know what made me decide to use those first thing, but I totally prefer them. I've tried Magic Loop, I've tried DPNs to make socks, don't like them. I like the 9-inch circulars, especially the ones that have like the longer needle and the shorter needle. Those are great. I ordered the two colorways of Arcane Fibre Works sock yarn and 9-inch circular needles, and the day that package came, I was so elated. I was so excited. I think I was away on the train at the time, and I knew like once I get home, I get to open this package. So I came in and I was like, oh yes, I get to open this package. And I cut into it, and I cut into the Back to My Roots hank of yarn. And I was heartbroken, and I cried. I was like, how can I redeem this? I was looking forward to it for so long. So what I ended up doing was opening up the hank. I had never worked with a hank before, so I didn't really know what to do. But I opened it up and like laid out all of the pieces of severed yarn. Because I didn't cut all the way through it, but like I cut through like a decent amount of it. So I laid out all the pieces of severed yarn, and I spent hours doing yarn surgery and tying the yarn back together in sections. And I was determined to use it, so I did use it to make my first pair of socks, which I knew were going to be for myself. I was like, this is my first attempt. I don't want these to be for anybody else but me, because they're probably not going to be great. But they turned out okay. I followed the Crazy Sock Lady vanilla sock recipe, and to this day, that's the only sock pattern I use. I just love vanilla sock in different colored yarns and different colorways. I love it. It's like collecting socks for me. So, back crack. But yeah, so I did end up using it, and the socks are full of knots, and I made them too big. So I still have them, but I don't wear them. But I would really love to make myself another pair of socks in the same colorway. After that, I spent the whole rest of that train season just doing socks and socks and socks and socks and socks. I found it was the perfect project to travel with because it's so small and I could just like have it like on my wrist or whatever, and just in any spare moment that I could find, like not while working, because really we don't get any spare moments. If we do get a break, I would take my knitting and do it on my break, but in any spare moments, like traveling on the bus to and from the hotels and stuff, and all my evenings at the hotels, I would be just like knitting on my socks. I found it so fun to talk to guests on the train about knitting and about yarn, because our what's the word? Well, basically, most of our guests who come on the train, because it's really expensive, are retired folks, older folks from all over the world. But I mean, I think it's fairly common for older ladies to be knitters, and they'd be coming on the train with their knitting and sitting on the train knitting the whole time in their seat. And I was so thrilled every time a lady or a guest would be knitting, because I'd be like, I love knitting. Can I talk to you about knitting? I don't know anybody else who knits. So I just loved talking to them about it. And then I would always have the opportunity to recommend to them, hey, do you like buying yarn as like a souvenir? Because there's this beautiful hand-dyed Canadian yarn company. They're not too far from where we're going. If we're like ending up in Banff or Jasper, I'd be like, it's just a couple hours drive away in Calgary here in Alberta. And it's beautiful colorways. Like if you're going to Banff, pick up the like beautiful Banff colorway or whatever. So I just loved talking to them about it, and they loved it. But yeah, I became known for knitting on the train, like in any spare moment, even like in meetings, I would be the one standing there knitting because I didn't have to look. I don't know. I don't like the attention of it. That's not why I do it. I'm like, I don't want to be like, oh, she thinks she's that like cool quirky girl because she's knitting in public. Like, no, it genuinely just soothes me and makes me happy, and I enjoy it, and I don't care if you think it's annoying. So but people would like tease me for being like the knitter. Oh, you just can't go anywhere without your knitting, your emotional support yarn. So I got pretty used to that kind of attention. Maybe going back this year, it'll be established, it won't be a new thing, and people won't think it's so noteworthy. I just made so many socks. I made most of them as gifts for people like who I was working with and stuff, so most of them I don't have anymore, but I do still have a bunch of them like that I've made for myself. Unfortunately, for some reason, I got this idea that because they would stretch out, the finished socks would stretch out on the sock blockers, that I didn't have to make them as long as like the pattern recommended. So I personally like a little bit of a shorter ankle than the pattern recommends, but then for like the foot length, I'd make it short because I was like, oh, it's gonna stretch out. But then like I also figured that superwash meant that you could put it in the dryer too. Don't know why I thought that. But then I was putting my socks in the wash and the dryer, and they were felting and they were shrinking, and a lot of them are like not wearable. Here, I'm gonna pull some out so I can show. I'm very sad that some of these are like not wearable anymore. Oh my gosh, these are my first ones. I don't know why I didn't show them. I forgot about showing my items. Can you tell this is the first time I've ever done this? So these are my Back to My Roots socks. I'm gonna try and hide my face. Back to My Roots socks with the Back to My Roots colorway by Arcane Fibres. So pretty. You can't see any of the knots, but you can see how much I felted them at the back. Focus. Like, look at the felting. So bad. Anyway, and then let's see if I can find some other ones. Oh, these ones I'm so sad about because I love this colorway, and I think they don't do it anymore. So the scrap that I have left, I think I'm going to use for another pair and just do the toe and the heel in it as accent color, and then do the rest of it in white. But these ones turned out so short. Like, why did I do that? I don't know, because I was lazy and wanted to pump socks out real quick, and they've felted so bad. Like on the bottom is one thing, but then like look at the heel, how bad it felted. So sad. I think this colorway is called Braveheart. The inspiration image that it goes with is like a lion against a blue background, and I love it because it reminded me of Aslan from Narnia, and so I was like, these are my Aslan socks, but they are not wearable. So sad. Anyway, that's those. But yeah, this is just an example of me learning these things by trial and error. So usually I'm a like, oh, I'll follow people's advice. I seek out advice. Like I'm not like a, oh, I'll figure it out kind of person. But in this case, I did have to just learn the hard way. So now I know how to treat my socks and how to make sure that they're long enough. As I mentioned, I was addicted to Arcane Fibre Works. I don't think I bought any other yarn in all of those months that I was on the train. I just bought Arcane Fibre Works in all different colorways that I could get my hands on, specifically the Western Canadian nature ones. And it was perfect because it's so romantic, because I'd be on the train and I'd be like looking out at the dramatic Rocky Mountains and like the cyan colored rivers in Banff, and I'd be knitting in the beautiful Banff colorway. Or like, oh, I'd be watching like the beautiful like gray brown mountaintops disappear into the clouds, and I'd be knitting socks with their colorway The Mountains Are Calling. I'd be passing through miles and miles and miles of forests on all sides, dense green forests, and knitting with the colorway For All the Trees. Like it just felt so fitting and like just enhanced my experience on the train last season so much. And I just found the practice so calming and stress relieving. I don't know if it's obvious, but like I pick at my fingers, like on the sides of my fingers, not at my nails themselves, except for that one. Whoops. But yeah, I pick at my fingers as like an anxious habit, like real bad. And knitting helps me not do that. If I could have like my sock knitting project in my hands at any given time that I was not otherwise occupied, I'd be working on that, and it was so nice. Hi. So I've realized very quickly when beginning to edit this video that I have tons of footage and it's gonna end up being way too long to post in just one part. So I'm gonna be posting it in 3 parts. So this is just part 1. Part 2 will be coming up next, and of course then part 3. So enjoy. Thanks.